Today we have Roger Viadero, and Roger is, I get my screens going the right way. Okay. Roger is from Western Illinois University. He teaches both down at Macomb and also at the Quad Cities campus. And today's presentation is called Headwater Streams, Important Upper Mississippi River Basin. A little bit about Roger. He is the director of Western Illinois University's Institute for Environmental Studies and is chair of Western's Environmental Science Ph.D. program. Dr. Viadero has over 20 years experience in designing, conducting, and leading multidisciplinary watershed scale environmental assessments that involve stakeholders from a variety of academic, regulatory, and non-governmental organizations. He integrates extensive field investigations with laboratory studies and modeling to develop remediation approaches that result in lasting improvements to the quality and resilience of natural aquatic systems. He's a board-certified environmental engineering member of the American Academy of Environmental Engineers and Scientists and an Ecological Society of America certified senior ecologist. So, all right, Roger, if you are ready, you can unmute and share your presentation.
All right, thanks, Carol. Well, I've unmuted now. We're halfway there. Let me share the presentation. All right. Are we good to go?
Yes.
Okay. One quick question for you, Carol, before we get started. You mentioned earlier about using the chat window to queue up questions and whatnot. I think I'm just going to try to keep this as low-key and casual as possible. So maybe if folks have questions, if I say something that doesn't make sense, or because I know that does happen occasionally, feel free to. I mean, I don't mind stopping during the presentation and just addressing things at the time the question comes up. It just kind of, this way we don't end up having somebody, on the second slide have a question and then have to go through the whole fine presentation without having that question answered. So I'll be glad to do that.
Okay. And I just got your live video there for you, Roger, just so folks can see who's speaking. So anytime you are ready to go.
Oh, okay. Well, terrific. And thank you for the introduction. If I ever need a professional press person or something like that, I'll get you to do it because it sounds way better when you say it. Folks, I'm really glad that River Actions has taken the initiative to put these the webinar series together, because I mean, even though we can't get together and do the usual type of thing that we do for the Upper Mississippi River Conference, it's still nice to be able to at least connect with folks and and use the technology that we've got out there to keep in touch. Having said that, I don't need to introduce myself because Carol did it. One thing I do also want to mention, Carol, did you sent out the handouts to everyone, right? The PDF. Okay.
Yes, I did. If you had registered before now, everyone who was registered was sent the PDF of your extras and slides.
Okay. Yeah. So everyone who has received the email with the PDF from Carol, because we're doing this e-learning out in the cloud, whatever the heck it is and whatnot, what I decided to do was to prepare some handouts for you that have the slides, which I guess you can review anytime you like. But what I've done is I've provided a little bit extra information, specifically some references, and whenever it's possible, I tried to put in hyperlinks and whatnot so that you can just click and go to the actual reference. Also things like what we call photo captions, as well as extra information like my calculations and what have you. If you're wondering how the heck I calculated that slope or what have you, I put all that kind of information in the notes section. And if you find something that's not clear or is wrong, feel free to drop me an email, and I'll be definitely sure to correct that. So, headwater streams in the upper Mississippi River Basin. Carol, I did not change the ecology, hydrology, and geomorphology part, so I apologize. But what we're going to do is take sort of like the 30,000 foot overview of what do you call it? Headwater streams in the UMRB. But since I don't really know what everybody's background is and whatnot, I thought what we would do is start with some of the basics. Quick outline for you. I'm going to talk about water for a few brief seconds. Talk about where it is, how it is or isn't accessible. Then we'll talk specifically, in general, about streams, what they do, how they do it, and then talk about stream classification. And that's going to lead us into a discussion about headwater streams based on the definition of stream order. We'll talk about their importance from an ecological and environmental point of view, and then we will take a look at some examples from streams, headwater streams in the upper Mississippi River Basin. I'll preface the rest of the presentation with there are like questions at the end that I have posed. I don't have the answers to them. If I had the answers to them, I would probably maybe not be here. None of us would be here, right? Because we would have solved all these great problems and challenges that we face. So. I'm as interested in hearing from you at the end of the presentation as you might be hearing from me. Having said that, I'm doing this from work. I haven't been to work, to the actual office in a little while, but I figured you don't need to hear my dogs or my kids and the doorbell ringing and things like that. So hopefully we'll get through this without any of that kind of silliness. Water in context. So a bit about the availability and abundance of water. As you may know, there's a finite amount of water on Earth, so it's not like we can, invent new water necessarily. We know that water goes through the environment by passing through different environmental compartments, and what I've got here for you is a schematic example of the hydrologic cycle. It is a real pared down representation, just to give you an idea of where water is, where it goes to, where it comes from. Something that you may not know about though are things like we've got runoff, we've got precipitation, that's fine. Ice, glacial ice, snow caps on mountains, fine, that's pretty straightforward. But also we've got, and I'm going to try something here, please hope this works. Oh, is it working? Yes, it is. Okay, cool. But we've got trees. This is when trees and other plant matter takes up water and goes through a process of evapotranspiration. It takes the water and releases it back into the atmosphere, and that's a process that folks don't usually think too much about. So I wanted to just point that out. And in terms of like how we access the evapotranspiration water, it's not exactly directly accessible, unlike things like in lakes and rivers. And even rainwater. The other important environmental compartment here that we've got a lot of fresh water tied up in is groundwater. Okay. So if you think about again, accessibility and abundance, we do have plenty of water, but a lot of that water is not actually directly accessible. So out of all the water on Earth, only 3% of it approximately is fresh water. So that's the water that we use for our biological processes. Only 3%. If you take a look at how that fresh water breaks down in terms of the compartments in which it's stored, you'll find that most of it's stored in groundwater, almost 70%. Just a little bit shy of 70%. The balance is held in ice and glaciers. Now, when I say ice and glaciers, I'm not talking about the ice that melts in March and what have you, or February, or these days might not be until April or May, but rather glacial ice. That leaves only 1% of that fresh water existing as surface water. So going from the big blue planet, the Earth's the big blue planet. Now we've already figured out that we only have 3% of the water on Earth that's available, that's directly usable, and of that 3%, well, only 1% exists as a surface water. And of that surface water, again, just to put things into context for you, only 2% of that is found in rivers and streams. So we're talking about today, 2% of the 1% of the 3%. Now, when I sat down and tried to come up with a good way to put that out there and to put things into context, I figured 2% of the 1% of the 3% is just yeah, that's not super straightforward. So if you would consider if all of the Earth, the water on Earth was say 1 million gallons, all the water on Earth is 1 million gallons total water. That would leave 6 gallons of river water. Okay, so 2% of the 1% of the 3%. 1 million gallons total, down to only 6 gallons of water in streams and rivers. So this is it's not a fully renewable resource because again we're not creating new water. So we need to think about taking care of this relatively limited resource. I'll stop preaching about that now. So let's talk about streams. What the heck are they? What do they do? How do we classify them? And just like my mom used to tell me, perhaps your folks told you as well when you were a kid, if I don't know what it is, they said, go look it up. So I figured I'm going to start this discussion by totally taking a look and seeing exactly what the definition of a stream is. Not the science and engineering definition, but just like a regular people definition. So I went to the Merriam-Webster dictionary online, and stream is a body of running water, such as a river or a creek, flowing on the earth. Okay, now that's yeah, that's almost as useful as using the word in its own definition, right? That's not going to really. We think we need to get a little bit more specific about what streams actually are. Something that came to mind when I read that, a body of water running, blah blah, flowing on the earth. The first thing that popped in my mind was, but what about rivers that go underwater, underground, and pop up, miles away? Maybe I'm overthinking this, but perhaps that's what 6 months of being locked in my house with my kids and dogs and what have you does to me. Anyhow, let's take a look at a little bit more sciencey specifications about with respect to what streams are, what they do, and how we classify them. So what streams do? From an ecological point of view, streams do 2 major things. They provide structure, and then they provide functions. And one way to think about the difference between structure and functions would be structure are the nouns, people, places, and things, and the functions are the verbs. So structure pools, places where pools of energy and matter occur. So it could be anything ranging from the actual biological components of the environment all the way to places. So it could be an organism, it could be a place, it could be a chemical constituent like nitrate or sediment or things of that nature. The function part, that's where things kind of get interesting, because that's where we start to talk about the exchange or conversion of energy and matter as things move throughout, as constituents move through our streams. Couple of things that I just put out here: providing habitat for aquatic and semi-aquatic organisms, moving water, sediment, and dissolved constituents. I think that's the thing that we're probably all most familiar with. And then, of course, shaping the earth and landforms. But this list could go on for slides and slides and slides. Other important functions include supporting base flow in our rivers. Again, we could go on with that for quite a while, and I think I put in some additional examples in the handouts for you, talking about more specifics about transporting and mixing chemical constituents and things like that. Okay, so if water, if streams provide structure and function, we probably need to talk about how water moves, because it's the movement again of these constituents through the stream that provide the function, or the relationships between constituents and the different compartments in the aquatic environment. So water's open to the atmosphere. So we're not talking about pressurized pipe flow. I have a lot of colleagues who are chemical engineers, and it drives them crazy when they work with environmental engineers and whatnot, because we always refer to water pressure in feet of water. Every chemical engineer wants to pull his or her hair out when you say, that's like 30 feet of water, because it's just not the normal way of thinking. They're used to dealing with pressurized pipe flow, but we're used to thinking about the driving force that moves water, in this case, in terms of differences in elevation. We all know that water flows from high elevation to lower elevation. Example that I've got on the slide here is a channel with a slope, something that's greater than 0, so water's going to flow from the left side to the right side. If there was no slope, the water wouldn't flow. Another characteristic of this type of what we call open channel flow is that the level of the water is parallel to the stream bed. So if we're talking about thinking back to functions and the movement and exchange of matter between compartments, it's the water and the movement of water that's going to be the key player here. So what in the world what factors affect water velocity? In this case, I mentioned earlier about bed slope, but also things like channel geometry. And if you have channels that are constantly changing in their cross-sectional area and whatnot, that actually adds friction, which has a tendency to slow water down. If you have lots of sinuosity and things of that nature, that's going to slow your water down. And also the bed material. So you could figure that if you had say a poured, reinforced, finished concrete channel, that water would probably flow through that with less resistance than perhaps if it was, I don't know, a stream bed that was full of irregularly shaped cobblestone, things of that nature. So that's the driving force. That's how water is going to move through these systems, through our streams. Now, a little example for you, and you're probably asking yourself, what is wrong with this man? He is, does that not say Tucker County, West Virginia? Oh my goodness. Okay, so I'm a little bit outside of the Mississippi River drainage, but the reason I chose to use this as an example is because, unfortunately, where most of us live and work, we don't have a whole lot of really great examples of major changes in elevation. And before I came here to Illinois, I used to work in West Virginia, so I've got lots of pictures. So I figured I'd pull a few out and share them with you. Tucker County, West Virginia is just as you enter into the eastern panhandle of West Virginia. It's in the mid-Appalachian region. The watershed that I've got a picture of here is actually a watershed that has been mined out since probably the 1940s. You see a bunch of Scotch pine, white pine, things like that. Those trees were planted after the Surface Mining Reclamation Act in like 1975. And believe it or not, today, many of those trees are actually dying, not because they've been poisoned by the mine, right? It's simply that they have a finite lifespan. So all of these trees that were planted for reclamation purposes are actually dying off. So it's just a little aside. What I did want to do to draw your attention to is a couple things here. I mentioned earlier that slope is going to be a driving factor. Well, if you take a look at the example, I made a three-dimensional map for you. And I've got the source materials here for anybody who's like a real GIS fanatic. This is shuttle radar topography data, actually from the space shuttle, and the resolution of this is actually 1/3 arc-second. So it's really super detailed elevation data. It's older for obvious reasons, because the government doesn't want to share the most up-to-date elevation data of continental United States, but still it gives you really pretty nice resolution. So looking in the direction that the photo is taken, we're going from an elevation of about 1,000 feet down to, I can't see what it is because we have the window up here, but something like we had about a 47-foot loss in elevation over about 640 feet. And if you do the math, or if you look in the notes section, you'll find out that that's about a 7.2% slope. Okay, that's a pretty good slope. So previously said that the slope is going to be one of the driving forces, but the other thing that determines helps to regulate the velocity of water as it flows through stream channels is the channel dimensions, channel cross sections, and what have you. And this is not exactly a super perfectly straight stream, but the material on the banks is actually, in many cases, mine spoil or other really low quality mineral soils. So that's all actually kind of like crusty stuff. So we don't have the liberation of sediment like you have in an alluvial valley, like we have in the upper Mississippi River. That fine particulate matter that's easily erodible. So the channel cross section remains relatively constant along the length of the stream. And the other factor we talked about was the bed material, right? The difference between a smooth surface and a really rough surface. This is actually a really friable slate material as well as some sandstone. So this stream has been taken down to the bare rock. And if I can pull up the laser pointer, I hope this doesn't make everything go crazy. But one of the other reasons I chose this is this little guy right here, this rock. About 3 or 4 minutes after I took this picture, I actually fell I actually fell and landed flat on my back, shoulder blades right across that rock. So I have a special connection to this to this picture. So pretty steep grade, slippery surface. Water's going to come off that slope pretty fast. We'll take a look at some counterpoints to that when we talk about examples here in the upper miss. So that's the driving force, water velocity. Some of the characteristics and features of streams, physical characteristics and features of streams that govern the rate that water flows. We should probably take some time, though, to talk about some of the important things that are circulated, right? More of those nouns, the structures and what have you. Just a couple quick examples. A long-nosed gar. This is collected, we collected this back in 2009 in Pool 19 during an electrofishing sampling trip with some of our biology students. The second photo from the left, these guys are northern leopard frogs. They don't live as tadpoles, they live in the water. As adults, they live in and around the water, so they're not fully aquatic, but rather semi-aquatic. And I'll tell you, I did actually do a little Photoshop in order to make those guys pop a little bit more, because even though I took I knew that there are frogs in here, it took me a while to actually find them in the much bigger picture. So those guys are northern leopard frogs. This was taken at Nahant Marsh maybe about I think it was last spring. Yeah, I think it was last spring. Pardon me, this spring. Last spring we were all up to water up to our eyeballs, so it was this past spring. Rainbow mussels, another aquatic organism that has some particular environmental significance. That was found in Pool 20. Again, when we were doing some sampling with students. And up to this point, I've focused on native organisms, but we can't forget the fact that there's a whole bunch of non-native stuff out there. Some things are out there, some things are on their way, and some things are getting a little bit to the point where they're almost out of control. But on the right-hand side, you see a silver carp on the top and a big head carp on the bottom. So our nouns, our structures, our people. Pardon me, I think I just said peoples. Our people, places, and things include native as well as non-native organisms. Sediments. I'd mentioned earlier that the example that I gave you from West Virginia, that was a mineral soil that had been everything had been leached out of it. It's really crusty. This is from Lee County in Illinois, sort of in the north central part of the state. And I thought to take 3 photos of this over time. I only have 2 photos, but you can actually see the length of this little sandbar in the middle of the stream moving over 2 seasons. Sand, and then of course what I mentioned earlier, this alluvial type of material, which is small particles, very, very easily erodible. So a lot different from, at least from my previous experience working out east. And of course, we can't have any conversation about anything aquatic in the upper Mississippi River without at least mentioning nutrients, right? So we've got stuff that's suspended, like the solids. We've got stuff that's living, like the fish and the mussels and the frogs. But we've also got some of the chemical stuff out there. In this case, when we think about nutrients, I think the first thing that comes to most folks' mind is nitrate, the NO3. But we also have to think about phosphate as well. And phosphate is called orthophosphate. That's the most significant, most reactive form of phosphate that you're going to find in natural water. Just for the sake of completeness, Carol, I don't want to overdo it with the whole sciencey thing. I'm sorry, you gave me the evil eye. But I did want to also include the nitrite NO2, as well as ammonia, because everybody focuses on nitrate. But if you think about the role that ammonia as well as nitrite play in nitrification and denitrification, it's just I felt I needed to include that for the sake of completeness, since these are aerobic organisms that are involved in nitrification and denitrification. They use up oxygen, which is obviously important to lots of stuff that lives in the water. So now we know something about what streams are. We had the kind of jank, sort of not really complete definition. We've got a sciencey definition, structure, function. We know that we've got things like vertical elevation loss, which provides some of the driving force, for the velocity to move this stuff. What stuff are we talking about? Aquatic organisms. We're talking about nutrients. We're talking about solids and sediment. How do we classify streams? Well, there are a lot of different folks who've taken a lot of different approaches. What I figured that we would do is use probably the most common, and that maybe many of you actually are familiar with. If you're not, no worries. Sit tight. I'll explain it to you. Real simple. But Strahler stream order. Strahler stream order. Professor Arthur Strahler, back in about, I think it was 1954, came up with the idea of treating a river network like a tree with lots of different branches, where you've got the smallest streams are what we're going to call the headwater streams, and we'll specify exactly what we mean by a headwater stream in just a minute. But you have the tiny branches that flow into larger limbs, and the larger limbs flow ultimately into the trunk. We've got the headwater streams out at the very edges of the tree, and the limbs and the trunk make up the larger rivers. That tree right there, the outline of that tree, can also be sort of thought of as a drainage basin, the area that drains the area of land that's drained by a particular network of streams. Let's see how this works actually with an example. So I'll call these Strahler rules. Real simple. When you have two streams that are the same order, in this case, in the example on the left-hand side, I've got two what we'll call first-order streams. These are streams that there's not, those are the tiny branches, the tiny little furthest out branches in our tree. When you have two streams that are of equal order, in this case, first-order streams, at their confluence, the stream that results from their confluence, becomes one order higher. Okay, that's if you got that, you're going to understand Strahler stream order without any problem. So when you have two streams of equal order, the stream the stream that results below their confluence is one order higher. In this case, I have two first-order streams come together at the confluence, and we increment up to what the confluence of that stream, the channel that results in the confluence of those streams is then a second-order stream. Okay, let's expand this out a little more. The gray ellipse that I've got in the top left-hand side, that's just the example, that little branch that I took from the previous slide. So just to let you know, I'm making a bigger network. So I'm building my tree here. I took another two first-order streams, and those guys come together to make a second-order stream. You'll see at the confluence of, at the confluence of the first-order stream, two first-order streams make a second-order stream, two second-order streams make a third-order stream. Real simple. Now you might be asking yourself, okay, you've only given examples where two equal order streams come together. What the heck do you do when there are not equal order streams coming together? We'll do that in just a second, but I do want to point out that in general, for the sake of this discussion, let's think about first, second, and third order streams as being headwater streams. Okay, that's not an arbitrary definition. But that's the way we're going to classify headwater streams. So the outer branches in our tree, when you get into the bigger limbs and the trunk, those are going to be our rivers. Now let's have another look at an even bigger network. Okay, the gray ellipse is the example that I had on the previous slide. Right, I had two first-order streams coming together to make second-order streams, two second-order streams confluence to make a third-order stream. But now I put in all this other crazy stuff on the left-hand side, just to let you see sort of what the bigger network looks like. And let's see what happens when we have the confluence of streams that are of unequal order. Okay. Carol, I see you in here, so could you nod your head? Is that showing up as a blow-up thing? Okay, good, great. All right, so here I've got a third-order stream and a first-order stream. The confluence of those two streams that are of unequal order, nothing happens. That channel, the third-order channel, remains a third-order channel. As you go further downstream, I've got a third-order channel confluence with a second. Again, they're not of equal order, so the third-order channel remains a third-order channel. Coming down, we have a first and a third. Everything stays the same until we get to this point, where we have two third-order streams. The confluence becomes a fourth-order stream. Okay. So equal orders. Confluence of equal order streams, we increase the order of the stream, and in general, the higher the order, the not necessarily the bigger or the faster, but the more stream length that's being drained by that channel. So our larger rivers in this case are made up of a whole network of these tiny branches. And you can see in this pretty basic example, I've already got us up to up to fourth order. And as you'll see later, we'll take a look at an example here in the upper Miss, and that's exactly what you'll see. It's a relatively small watershed that already goes up to fourth order. Getting above fourth order, though, is a little bit more involved. And of course, the drainage basin is the area of land that's drained by a network of streams. So any water that falls in this area right here is going to make its way into one of those streams that I've illustrated previously, and it will ultimately end up draining down to the outlet down here, which is a fourth order stream. So just wanted to take this sort of schematic look at how you classify streams to make sure everybody's on the same page. All right, you may be wondering, I said fourth order, that's getting to be kind of a larger stream, right? And actually, if it's a fourth order stream, it's no longer a headwater, right? But for more context, thought we'd look at some of the stronger orders of some of the largest streams in the world. The Amazon River is a 12th order stream. You'll see the Mississippi River actually is a 10th order stream. But since we're talking about the upper Mississippi River, I have to caveat things by reminding folks that it doesn't become a 10th order stream until it hits the lower Miss. In the upper Mississippi River Basin, we're still talking about the river being a 6th order channel. Let me see. Oh, something else that's kind of interesting. For those of you who are maybe Pittsburgh sports fans, I don't know that there are probably a lot of you, but the sports stadiums are located at Point Park, which is actually at the confluence of the Allegheny and the Monongahela rivers. So we've got, in this case, two 7th order streams coming together, and it's actually those two water bodies that form the Ohio River. So you can go and catch a ball game, football, baseball, what have you, and also enjoy knowing that you're seeing the confluence of two 7th order streams to create an 8th order stream. So this construct, this Strahler order, it works for little tiny streams like we saw with the little headwater stream, but it also works for some of the world's really big streams. And of course the Illinois and the Rock River, for context, since we're talking about the upper Miss, those are 5th order streams. Okay, so actually I think we've covered a lot of ground here so far. We've got definition of, we know something about water. It's we've got tons of it, not a whole heck of a lot, right? 1% of the 3% of the 2%. No, 2% of the 1% of the 3%. See, I can't even keep that straight. Is actually available to us in rivers and streams. We know that streams provide structure and function. The nouns are the places as well as the organisms, in addition to the chemical constituents, and then functions, which are how things move and are transformed in our river ecosystem. Now let's take a moment to focus in on rivers and streams in the upper Mississippi River Basin. So we've got some general terminology under our belts. Let's take a look at what's going on in our backyard. Just like with the definition that I got from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, I think it's important to start at the beginning. So instead of jumping ahead with the upper Mississippi River Basin, I thought we'd start with the Mississippi River Basin. Many of you are probably like, oh my Lord, here we go again with this same picture. We all know it very well. But context, again, I think is really important. So Mississippi River Basin covering 40% of the continental United States, and almost just a little bit shy of 13% of the total area of North America. North America is a pretty big continent. That's a heck of a huge drainage area. The Mississippi River Basin drains 31 states and 2 Canadian provinces. Again, magnitude-wise, we've got this river that ultimately becomes a 10th order channel, which is seconded only by what you have the Amazon, we have the Nile River. Huge system, huge drainage system. Certainly something of not just national, but international importance. And what we're going to do is take a look just at one sub-basin, our good friend, the upper Mississippi River Basin. We all know it flows through 5 states. And something that's particularly important that I just want to point out to you about the upper Mississippi River Basin is that the upper Miss is actually recognized for having sort of a dual purpose. The upper Mississippi River is not only important to the nation's environment and ecology, but it serves a dual role as being a water body of economic and commercial importance. And that I think really sets it apart from a lot of other rivers where we might be able to concern ourselves just with preservation of the environment or just with restoration of the environment. But the challenges that we face in the upper Miss, particularly on the main channel and on the larger tributaries, we really need to make sure that everybody remembers from a practical point of view that there's always the issue of balancing between the environment and environment ecology and commerce. And of course, we also know that a stair step of water is created by a series of locks and dams that go from St. Anthony Falls all the way down to Mount Price Lock and Dam at St. Louis. So these are all features that set the upper Mississippi River Basin apart from others in the drainage. So you're probably saying that has nothing to do with streams, so I'll bring it back to streams for you. What I did was I decided, everybody loves maps. I don't really know why. I'm not a geographer, but I make a heck of a lot. For somebody who's not a geographer, I make a heck of a lot of maps. What I did, again, in order to kind of convey the magnitude of not just streams, but ultimately the headwater streams in the upper Mississippi River Basin, I went to the National Hydraulic Database. That link is available for you in your notes, in case, again, anybody who's like a GIS person, you can go there and you can download this data set for yourself. And I made a map for you of first, second, third, through sixth order streams in the upper Mississippi River Basin. That's kind of a lot of blue there. It's a lot of blue. Looks pretty busy. Looks like there's a heck of a lot of stuff going on there. And it turns out, if we were to take each one of those reaches represented by each little line, and we were to connect them from tail to tip, we would have a total reach length of about almost 26,500 miles. Okay. Well, the 2% of the 1% of the 3% thing, remember, I was like, how do you get your head around that? So we said 1 million gallons of total water actually is what corresponds to 6 gallons of water in rivers. To give you an idea of exactly how long 26,429 miles is, I thought what we would do is equate it to the diameter of the Earth at the equator. So this is just the upper Mississippi River Basin, first through sixth order streams. And if I put those just like string, the reaches tail to tip, I would have a little, I think it's like 7.3, I'm sorry, 3.3 times the diameter of the Earth at the equator. 3.3, not 7.3, 3.3. Regardless, that's huge. That's crazy. Just like I said, the area of the drainage basin is huge and crazy and significant. That's a word I like to use a lot when I'm thinking about what we do here in the upper Mississippi River drainage. A lot of times students will be like, oh, why are we doing this? Who cares, whatever. And then you point out the fact that what we do, the things that we see every day, actually, in many cases can be relevant to everybody who's living and working in watersheds that are perhaps smaller than ours, which is like almost every other watershed in the world. So when you're sitting on the 74 bridge, cursing your existence because you're stuck in traffic, think about that. Take a look at the river and take a look at how the water is moving and whatnot, and just think about sort of where we are on Earth and why this water body is so significant. Okay, I'm preaching again. Stop the preaching and back to streams. So we had that map that looked pretty busy, first through sixth order streams, lots of blue on there. I promise you, I'm not going to go first, second, third, and what have you, but rather I chose now to get rid of everything on that map except for the first order streams. So the first order streams are like the little tiny branches, right? The furthest out branches in our tree network. That still looks awful busy. That looked like a heck of a lot of blue. There's not as much, but still, that's a lot of blue on there. And if you do the tail to tip again, of all the little tiny streams, and look, we're still talking about 16,000 miles. 16,000 miles of total reach length. Okay, 16,000, 26,429. These numbers are all starting to run together. So let's take a look at how this breaks down by order. And what I did here, just made a little chart for you, in this case, breaking down the percentage of total stream length by order. And I think it becomes pretty apparent that those first order streams, the little tiny ones, right, the little tiny furthest out branches in this network, account for almost 61% of the total stream length in the upper Mississippi River Basin. If you add up the first, second, third order, so these are headwater streams, right? Our headwater streams account for almost 88% of the total length of streams in the upper Mississippi River Basin. those big guys, right, the Rock River, the Illinois River, what have you, Fourth, and then ultimately Mississippi River, those guys only account for around, a little over 12% of the total stream length. Now, of course, they account for a tremendous amount of water volume, right, water throughput. But still, if you look at this based on length, this, I think, is where you start to see the significance of these headwater streams. So, take a look at an example to kind of hone in on some stuff, an example of actually what happens on the landscape. I'm going to use an example of a stream in Knox County, Foreman Creek in Knox County, Illinois. Where's Knox County? And I was going to say it's outside Oneida or Watauga, but that would probably not be too informative. So if you take a line, draw it between Peoria and Moline, roughly in the middle of the line between Peoria and Moline, a little bit north and east of Galesburg, you're going to find Foreman Creek. Before, when I went through my schematic example, we looked at the tiny branches going to the bigger trunks and what have you. You'll see our study area, the area I'm going to talk about in a couple, for the next few slides. Right here, the yellow dot. This right here is the Foreman Creek drainage with all of its little tendrils. Foreman Creek flows into Walnut Creek, which flows into the Spoon River, which ultimately confluences with the Illinois River, which we know goes into the Mississippi River and ultimately out into the Gulf of Mexico. So again, just to emphasize the connectivity, going from the super tiny streams that are found out on the landscape all the way to things, their significance of the things that go into those streams on downstream receptors. A little bit of an aerial map for you. This is a leaf-off map to give you an idea of what you probably could have guessed if I didn't tell you, but Foreman Creek is in the middle of production agriculture. That's surrounding land use. You'll see the network of streams here leading into, this is the Foreman Creek drainage, Foreman Creek drainage leading into Walnut Creek. Walnut Creek is a fourth order stream. And starting way out here, these guys, the first order streams, look like they start, well, what it looks like they start out in the ag fields. And in many cases, they actually do. They actually originate from some of the tile discharges. Kind of an interesting point. Now let's take a look at, again, to emphasize the idea of going from the network to the drainage area. In this case, this is the Foreman Creek drainage, and you can see first order streams coming together, confluence second order, etc. as we go downstream, ultimately discharging fourth order stream into Walnut Creek, and Walnut Creek's fourth order below Foreman Creek. Okay. Now, what I want to do is replace the little circle, the little yellow circle, with a yellow kind of sort of square. Quadrilateral, we'll just call it a quadrilateral. This is the Nichols farm. We've had the good fortune to be able to work with the family that's been running this farm for a couple generations, actually. And a few interesting things about the Nichols farm is that actually it's bisected by Foreman Creek. Right here. But also, I'm going to try my trick with blowing the thing up again here. I'm sorry, not blowing thing. That was the wrong terminology. What do they call it? Zooming. Zoom in here. You'll notice that the area close to Foreman Creek, it's got this darker coloration. That's actually a bunch of property that they put in conservation land. So these folks are farmers, traditional corn and soybean rotation. They do have cattle, but they also do things that they take it seriously. They want to keep their soil where it belongs. They want to keep the nutrients on the land, and I think they've taken some pretty positive steps toward using those programs that the government makes available to encourage people to improve. Well, again, to keep soil where it belongs, which is not in the streams. So now you'll see why I chose to not have this as a 3D map. Believe it or not, this is a 3D map, and I even exaggerated the vertical scale by a factor of 5. Yeah, I know it doesn't really show up that well, but take a look at this guy. We've got at the confluence of those two, the second order and a first order stream to the left side, makes again a second order channel, but you have to go 4,100, almost 4,200 feet across the entire property in order to pick up an elevation difference of 7 feet. You'll recall my previous example, I think we went like 600 something feet, and we had almost 50 feet of head loss or elevation difference. In this case, we've got to go 4,200 feet in order to pick up 7 feet. And you know, this is another one of the challenges of working on this type of landscape, because even if you want to use sort of traditional surveying instruments, you want to go out and measure slopes and things like that, you've got to go some pretty far distances when you're shooting your elevations to make sure that you're coming up with, you know, that you're not inadvertently standing on a molehill, that the data you're getting on slope is actually something that is, you know, is actually significant. Anyhow, the slope in this case is 0.2%. And actually, I'll be honest with you, I was feeling bad because I don't want to be busting on all the low slopes here, but it's actually 0.16%, so I rounded it up to 0.2%, compared to 7.4%. You know, what does that actually mean? Again, the driving force is gravity. More elevation means higher velocity, but it's not just the elevation, right? It's not just the elevation, it's the cross-sectional dimensions. It's also the bed material, things of that nature. So that's why we need to think about this, not again, just by the driving force, but including a more integrated approach. So speaking of integrated approach, I want to take a look in this little ellipse right here. In the north excuse me, the confluence of the North Fork of Foreman Creek. It's not actually called that. That's just what we call it because you have to call it something. The South Fork, and again, a second order and a first order stream coming together at the confluence. The stream channel down the stream from the confluence is a second order stream because they're not of equal order. What I'm going to do is take a look right here at the North Fork, right here, right at this little straight part that goes into the main channel. I'll show you a couple of photos, show you a couple of representative photos also that show you the bed material, and we'll talk about how channel material affects these the movement of constituents in these low gradient headwater streams. So here we go. There's a great picture of me standing in the water. For some reason, in early April, I was the only person who actually happened to have, you know, waders that day when we were going sampling. So of course, I'm in the water. Anyhow, we're just doing a typical cross-sectional survey, a differential elevation survey of each of these forks, trying to do a few things to determine geomorphologically significant features. So channel width, what's the channel width when the stream fills the entire channel, things of that nature. And you'll notice right here, this guy right here, this looks like a plume. Looks like a plume. And you'll notice that I'm not the world's, you know, biggest guy, but that's up to like mid-thigh at that point. Believe it or not, as you can see, there certainly is water there, but there's also a whole heck of a lot of sediment. And this is something that I really find to be incredibly interesting. And I know that everybody listening to me is just like sitting at the edge of your seat, because I'm going to talk about sediment and the plasticity of the fluid. So just hold on. All right, sediment in the North Fork. Everybody has a camera on their phone, and I'm really fortunate because students, they take pictures of everything. Sometimes things that you just wouldn't take pictures of, but in this case, we've got some good photos of the before and the after. This is the before and the after in the North Fork. Before and after I stepped into the creek. Okay, I stepped into the creek. I didn't jump around in the creek. I didn't take an outboard motor and, you know, put it in there to churn up all the sediment and whatnot. I stepped into the creek. One of the reasons I say I stepped is because that looks like a, you know, it's the water's clear on the left-hand side. It looks like a relatively even, solid bottom. It's not even, it's not solid. It's actually sludgy sediment, goopy, sludgy sediment. So what you see on the right-hand side is actually that alluvial material, that very fine particulate matter. It's easily erodible. That makes its way into these waterways, being liberated in the water column. And because the particles are so tiny, they have a tendency to stay in the water column. So it gets to be a little bit difficult. It gets to be something of a challenge to do things to remove them once they're mobilized in the water channel. So I mentioned we were doing some differential elevation surveys and whatnot. This is the North Fork of Foreman Creek. You'll notice this is not, it's a second order channel, but it's not small. It's 11 feet wide the day that we took our measurements. Bank full width is a little bit over 21 feet. And on the right-hand side, it just plateaus. That's what I've got represented by the dotted line there. But it's just a plateau that moves back onto that crep land, that the hardwood, the planted conservation land. And you'll notice at the thaw leg, so the deepest point along a line, the deepest point in that cross section, you're talking about a depth of 1.8 feet. Okay, so it's not really that deep. But it's not shallow either. It's not a puddle. Where this becomes significant is when you take a look at what fraction of that cross section is made up of sediment. When I saw all that sediment pop up, I just couldn't help myself. So luckily, my truck is full of all kinds of stuff, including an ultrasonic depth sounder. So we went and somebody went and got the sounder and whatnot, and we took some measurements of the height of the sediment layer underneath the water, and that's represented in this cross section. If you do this if you do your assessment based on area, 43% of that cross section was occupied by that sludgy, goopy, viscous sediment. Again, that's what I thought was like a stream bottom. I couldn't figure what the big deal is. Stream bottom, I'm just going to step in. Yeah, well, big surprise. The other thing that's kind of interesting about this material is because it's so made up of such tiny particles that have been sitting there quiescently, it's very easy to get trapped. Very, very easy to get trapped. It forms a really tight suction around your boots, and I was not willing to lose my new wading boots because I have at least some pride. And the only way I was able to get myself out was by kind of like dancing like a lunatic, sort of jiggling my feet around and whatnot. And you can actually feel, as you put a little bit of energy back into the water, into the water sediment column, you can actually feel the sludge release and just whoop, step right out of it. It's kind of crazy. And that's what I mentioned earlier about the plasticity. Reminds me a little bit of ketchup, right? You got to shake the daylights out of ketchup and then it flows, but if you just let it sit there, it doesn't flow so great. Also, having your feet and legs locked in 2 feet of water where more than about half of it is sludge in a flowing water body when it's cold out is probably, well, it's not an experience I recommend, but I guess what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. By the way, the students do enjoy watching me go in the water. I think they have some kind of a lottery or whatnot trying to figure out if I'm going to fall. I did not actually fall that day, which I'm very proud of. Okay, so context, again, scale, what have you. How do we put this into some context? Well, we've got that cross section of sediment, right? A little under 5.5 square feet in area. What I thought we would do is sort of just like a for instance, would be to extrude that area out 10 feet long. Now, if anyone's wondering what the heck's he doing, hypothetically extruding sediment, blah, blah, okay. We could extrude out any length you like. I just kept it 10 feet to make the math easy. But so again, take that cross section and pull it out 10 feet. Turns out the sediment fraction in this case, is 408 gallons in 10 feet. 43% of that overall cross section made up of this sediment. So again, what the heck is 408 gallons? 408 gallons of wet sediment is about 7.3 55-gallon drums of wet, goopy sediment. Now, the fact that that sediment is made up of really tiny particles makes it incredibly difficult to dewater. Not just from like a technological point of view, because I mean, I guarantee you, if there's something that you want to have taken out of water, I'll get it out of the water for you. I might not be able to get it out of the water for you in any way, shape, or form that works from an economic point of view, but I will get it out for you. So if you think about opportunities to do things like to dewater sediment and things like that, it becomes a little bit of a challenge when you think about the magnitude of the problem, the volume of, in this case, again, wet sediment that we're dealing with. Okay, so a couple examples, looking at the low slope, looking at some of those cutback channels, things like that, goopy sediment, what have you. So now that we know, hopefully everybody can agree that the headwater streams, and particularly in the upper Mississippi River Basin, are important. What do we do next? How do we put this together? So, because it seems like everybody has to have a quote from somebody in their PowerPoint, I chose Ben Franklin. An ounce of cure, an ounce of prevention. You could tell this must be a COVID year. I said an ounce of cure. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Well, I kind of want to modify this a little bit to say maybe more than 1,000 pounds of cure. Right? Something I alluded to earlier, doing things that are smart, like trying to take measures to keep things where they belong, keep the soil on the ground, where it belongs, on your farm or on your property. Keep it out of the water column. That makes a heck of a lot of sense. You can do that by enhancing your soil management practices, but also doing things like making sure you've got healthy riparian buffers. The example I had for the Nichols Farm in Foreman Creek, I mentioned that they do a lot of conservation reserve programs and things like that, taking advantage of support that the government has through both the state and the federal government to do smart things in order to keep things where they belong, to keep the soil and sediment where it belongs. But we've also got to think about what we do when things do get into the waterways. So we've got to think about developing and maintaining in-stream structures and functions that work together to do things like keep that sediment from making its way ultimately downstream to the Illinois River, to the Mississippi River, ultimately out to the Gulf of Mexico. These are all things that you can do. It makes better sense to do it, to keep it out before it hits the waterway. But what about practicability? Like Carol mentioned, I'm an environmental engineer. So the science side of me wants to be like, oh, great, we can do this, and that's super. Now we've solved the world's problems, and we'll go home. But the engineer side of me says, that's great. I mean, these are priorities. It makes sense. We should do this. But again, making it happen, that's a tough one. And I think that's something that probably most everybody, I hope everybody here today agrees that that's something that we all need to kind of have a bit more of a discussion about in terms of priorities and the way we do things. I'm preaching again. So because I'm a professor, I don't know, I felt like I had to put some kind of question on here. Which focuses stream protection or restoration? And since we're doing a 30,000 foot overview, I put protection, restoration, remediation, whatever. I'm lumping them all together. So I'm not, clearly to keep stuff from getting in there to begin with is better, but restoration, protection writ large, which focus is going to have the greatest net positive impact? Okay. A few large projects at key locations. That's kind of like a lot of what we see these days. That's been a pretty common approach. Many smaller projects that are spread out across your landscape. Hedging my bets, I said, probably a combination of two of them. Can't go wrong with that. I think D is sort of my favorite. I showed this question to some of my students, and they were like, "Oh yeah, definitely, I'm going with D," or all of the above. And actually, I think that actually all of the above might also could also you can make an argument where all of the above could even be an appropriate answer. I don't have that answer, but I think what we need to do is think about striking somewhere in the middle, somewhere balancing between those larger projects, as well as going up to the source of sediment, so going to the source of nutrients as they get in, before they get into our streams, and doing some smart things on a small scale. So if we were to focus on headwater protection and restoration, again, protection and restoration writ large, what do we need to do? First thing we've got to think about is shifting the prevailing orthodoxy. Now that sounds like a bunch of professor talk right there, but think about how we do stuff and how we make investments with limited resources. What do we want? What do we expect? In this case, we know that resources are limited. Resources, not only money, like actual capital, but material, people's time, things of that nature. We of course want to get the most value for our money, and that goes whether you're buying groceries or you're restoring or protecting streams. And I guess since it is the day after, or 2 days after the election, we all know that politicians really, the folks who get the money to do these projects, they want something that they can point to, and rightfully so, because people want to hold our elected representatives accountable. So politicians like something big, like, hey, my 50,000 acres of bottomland was restored with the sponsorship of Representative whomever. Okay, that's great. I mean, absolutely, that's super. That's 50,000 acres of bottomland that was not previously protected or restored. But if you think about the area of just the upper Mississippi River Basin, which is about a little shy of 200,000 square miles, man, 50,000 acres to 200,000 square miles. But we'd have to do a heck of a lot of those big projects to make substantial impacts on water quality in our streams. A couple other thoughts. How in the world do you, and I put equate first, and equate or relate the outcomes of small efforts to a few large projects. As I was putting these slides together, I had equate first, and then I thought to myself, you can't really equate them. They're not equal. They're inherently not equal. So that's why I changed it to relate. Many of you maybe just think that I might be going a little overboard here with the terminology, but I don't think so. And I don't think we can equate the actual value of large-scale projects and small-scale projects, because this has so much to do with other things other than the ecology, the engineering, the actual making it happen. It's got to do with the economics. It's got to do with social acceptance, the willingness that people have to pay to make these improvements, or the willingness that they have to accept the impacts. Finally, improving the scalability of science. If we're going to do things in the headwaters, we need to tailor those approaches, or science and engineering approaches, to fit those local conditions, right? Going from the big projects on the major streams to smaller projects in lower order streams. And of course, to make sure that what we do in those upland, those low gradient headwater streams actually still fits into the bigger set of goals that we have for managing our water resources. And with that, I am looking forward to having some chat with you about my thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Roger. I have been educated for sure.
Oh, cool. Well, that's my job.
And,
yeah, again, I was trying to strike a balance between talking about some to lay it out for everybody, to get everybody on the same page, and then try to drive it home with some of those examples of scale and things.
Yeah. So for our attendees, feel free to type in a question in the Q&A chat window, and we'll get answers from Roger here.
Oh, this is great. This is just like class. Any questions? Except I can't see people. At least in class or on those Zoom meetings that we have for class, you can at least see people and kind of tell who's looking at you like, what the heck is he talking about?
I'm sure they're all typing furiously at the moment.
Typing furious. Oh yeah, that's what I used to tell myself about class too.
But I while we're waiting for those, I have a question. So you talked about so like the Nichols Farm example and the amount of sediment, and obviously we're sending nutrients down into the larger order streams and rivers. And so do the nutrients travel like in or within the sediment, or are they just the water?
Thanks, Caroline. Actually, I'm glad you mentioned that. And another reason I wanted to provide everyone with my notes is because I knew I was going to forget something. Point of reference again, in Foreman Creek in April, the phosphate concentrations were below our detection limits. So detection limits like 0.04 milligrams per liter, so that's pretty low. But the nitrate concentrations were something around 35 to 40 milligrams per liter. Now, is that good? Is it bad? Is it whatever? Well, if you think about the EPA standard for drinking water, so for nitrate in drinking water, the EPA standard is 10 milligrams per liter. Now, does that mean that every stream that has nitrates in it is poison? No, not at all. But as a primary drinking water source, you'd have to be worried about things well, you'd have to be worried about things like the interference of nitrates with oxygen uptake in your blood, things like that. That's why you wouldn't want to be drinking it. But well, you and I aren't drinking it. Lots of other stuff is drinking it. Lots of other stuff is living in it. Things like that. So in terms of the nutrients typically enter the system in the aqueous phase. So they enter with water. They get washed off the fields. However, when they have when you have this tiny particulate matter, the very fine soil particles, those fine soil particles, because they're tiny, means that they actually have a really high surface area. Tiny particles have a really high surface area. And there certainly is a certain amount of absorption of lots of things, but including nutrients, notably nitrate, onto the organic surfaces of soil. So as you give the nutrients time to interact with those solid particles, the little tiny particles, you can actually have some of the nitrate become associated with the solid phase. One of the challenges with understanding these systems has to do with mixing. Because again, you saw how like the before and the after, it's just this, before it doesn't, I mean, it looks like, it looks like the stream bed, but it's not. And you know that it is flowable the second you really kind of kick things up. But otherwise, that sediment can sit there at, maybe about a foot deep in some cases. It sits there and it becomes anoxic. So instead of having the aerobic organisms that would do the nitrification and denitrification process, now you've got a bunch of sediment that's sitting there, and those aerobic organisms can't do their thing. You have anaerobic conditions, which is one of the reasons why if you've ever disturbed sediment like that, and then you're traipsing around, all of a sudden it really smells like something really gross. Well, that's due in large part to the fact that you've taken that system that was previously no longer aerobic, and you've just exposed it to a bunch of oxygen, which starts oxidation again and makes all the stinky smell. But again, if you treat the sediment as like a separate compartment, you have sediment that's 99% water. That water contains nutrients, and for our discussion, let's just say it contains nitrate and forget the phosphate and what have you. It contains nitrates, so you're going to have some removal of nitrate from the water, but not the water in like the bulk water column, the water flowing water. I'm talking about the water that's in between the sediment particles. And again, that makes this problem substantially different from what you would expect. From what you would expect in either of the two areas where stream restoration and what have you really kind of came of age as an art and a science, right? You've got folks doing stream restoration who developed their approaches in the Rocky Mountains, and then to a lesser extent out east in the Appalachian Mountains, all the way up through some of the mountains in New England as well. But according to their definitions, a headwater stream has a slope of more than 5%. So like if you wanted to be like totally hardcore applying the definitions of stream restoration experts, I don't think there would be a headwater stream between the two mountain ranges, which is why this stuff, which is one of the reasons why this has kind of caught my interest, seeing seeing how trying to apply those techniques that are now tried and true, and then trying to actually adapt and apply the stuff that works, trying to apply the stuff that works, and then to adapt in a meaningful way those things that don't work. So, and actually, I do have a student who's working on the sediment issue right now, and what I mentioned earlier about like being a sort of a plastic fluid, it's exactly what it is. It behaves. It doesn't flow very well unless you put some energy into it. You don't have to put a heck of a lot of energy into it. So my crazy dancing to get my feet out of the sediment was enough to do that, just to liberate my feet. But still, when you let those solids settle, they do become sort of like a separate compartment unto themselves. And we are still talking about something like, when I said 99%, I'm talking about like 99.6% water. So just a very tiny fraction of sediment, of solids in the sediment. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Kind of?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe too much answer? Okay. I have some really great pictures of it too.
It's your thing, Roger. We do another question here. From Leland Searles. I have done several stream projects after training in Iowa and Minnesota. While I agree that headwater streams are crucial, they require multiple landowners to cooperate across a sub-watershed. Finding a landowner along a larger stream, 50 to 100 foot width, sometimes is easier, that is along large Strahler 2 or Strahler 3 and 4 streams. Do you have comments about how this fits into the big picture as far as doing something versus nothing in regard to sediment, nutrients, and stability?
Yep. My first answer is yep, totally agree. I mean that's a huge that's a huge challenge, and that's one of the reasons that I don't have sometimes I don't even feel like trying to posit potential solutions. Particularly in the upper Midwest, we've got plenty of land that has these low order these headwater streams that's owned by private individuals, and we're fortunate to be able that we're working with folks again in Knox County, and these are private farmers. It's not any kind of what do you call it, like corporate ag or anything like that, but a bunch of private farmers who are interested in doing things, well, like I mentioned earlier, to keep the sediment on the landscape, to keep the nutrients where they belong, as opposed to continuing to do things like fertilizing, and knowing that maybe 3 to 5% of that ammonium hydroxide fertilizer that you apply is actually going to be incorporated into plant mass, so you're actually blowing almost 95% of that out into either the air, if you apply as a gas, or into the air and water. Yeah, I mean, absolutely, that's a challenge, and that's where I think that shifting your prevailing orthodoxy. I couldn't come up with a better way to say doing stuff to get people to do the right thing and be involved. And clearly, I don't have a super answer to that. I would say to answer the later question about is it better to do something on the larger streams, not necessarily headwaters, but maybe like the fourth-ish order streams. You know what? Think back to the multiple choice question, and I'm going to throw down, and I'm going to cop out and say, yeah, I think it is probably a combination of both, right? We know that we can't force people to to let us. You can't force people to let you help them keep their productive soil and what have you. Okay, fine. But those people who are willing to participate, that's great. You make the options available for them, and and I do also recognize that I'm a professor, so I have the opportunity, I have the luxury of being like wandering and pondering and stuff like that, and trying to find these opportunities to start to do things, whereas folks in the conservation agencies, people who are trying to make this happen on a large scale, really, y'all don't have that. You don't have that. You have a different set of circumstances. I mean, you actually have to make it happen, and making it happen has a lot to do with buy-in. Something that, for what it's worth, I've given something along this talk to a number of different groups, maybe in about the past 2 years, including folks in the Farm Bureau, in addition to more traditional groups that you'd expect, like what do you call it, Audubon Society, more citizen activist environmental groups. And the fact that the Farm Bureau was even interested in listening to it, I thought was a step in the right direction. But that's all it is. I mean, it's a step in the right direction. Mm-hmm. So I do agree.
The subject of regulation comes up here and there, and is that what we have to get to before we get quote unquote buy-in?
Yeah, you would hope that you would hope that you don't have to whack folks over the head with a stick in order to get them to do things that ultimately, benefit not only the environment, downstream receptors, which we're not talking only about like the Gulf of Mexico, but we're also talking about the folks that live, I don't know, like the next plot of land over, or people that live 2 counties over, right? Again, I would hope that you don't have to whack them in the head and be like, this is going to be good for you, it's good for you, it's good for other people, and what have you. I'm of the mind that, especially these days, telling people they got to do something is about probably the world's best way to get them to not do it. But again, if you think about what's the value of a ton of that, really rich, dark brown, black, organic ag soil? What's the value of that? Okay, and there are people who do nothing but like actually monetize natural resources and whatnot. I am glad I'm not one of them, because that's to me that's a pretty difficult task. But what's that worth? There's a value if you sold the land and by acre, but there's also a value of that soil has in terms of its future productivity, money in your pocket, right? I think that some other things that might be a little more effective would be approaching folks and say, look, hey, if you were able to take advantage of, say, some NRCS conservation programs, and I'm just picking that out of the air. It could be a state program, it could even be some private, some private conservation initiatives as well. But you say, hey guys, this is only going to cost you 20% of the total cost, it's going to be passed on to you. So we're going to subsidize this to the tune of 80%. And by the way, I know it sounds good, and we're like hugging the trees and petting squirrels, and everybody's happy. But forget the trees and the squirrel. But this is actually what, over the next 10 years, this is going to mean to not maybe you, but what happens if you or your children or your siblings' children or whatever take over working that farm? This is the value, the dollar value, some reasonable way of assigning dollar value to keeping that soil where it is. That's one of the things that I think is perhaps missing in a lot of the discussion. However, I do understand that putting a dollar value on a ton of soil, particularly where you get professors involved, we'll all be having a committee to discuss stuff, and then I'll probably just turn off the video and I don't know, walk the dog or something, because it is a challenge and everybody's got an opinion. And actually, it's just that's just it. Many of these folks have opinions, and they're well-informed opinions, right? The problem is it's not just like one person sitting in a room all alone in Macomb. Oh, that's me, I'm sorry. Not just one person, making these decisions, but it's something that really has to involve a whole heck of a lot of people. You're not going to have an ideal solution, because no matter what we do, and I spend the vast majority of my time working with my students and what have you outside, out in the field. Folks sometimes don't have a great appreciation for the fact that all the books that we have, all the internet sites, and all the lab experiments that you can do, they help to give us sort of a general blueprint for the way things are going to work actually out on the landscape. But I think the saying is that no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy, right? Same thing when you step foot out in the creek, or the second you leave the lab, you're talking about working with Mother Nature. And there's another saying that Mother Nature bats last, and she bats 1,000. And I think, at least for me, the flooding in 2019, wow, that just gave me a full-on slap upside the head full of Mother Nature batting last and 1,000. If you want to talk about like non-ideal, just complete craziness, not only in terms of the extent of flooding, the physical extent, but also the duration of flooding. And if you think about it, even like with the current COVID pandemic and whatnot, right? These are, as particularly as field scientists, boy, we've got to do a lot of adapting, and that's why I kind of personally like to take the to take the sort of multidisciplinary approach, whether it's the economics folks who can help to not to make the sell, but yeah, to help to sell the idea, to provide folks with a better insight into different ways of looking at the value of their land. You know, I think we all kind of a role to play. And at different times in the process, you're going to find some folks having more of a role, less of a role, but we really all do have a role to play.
But you made a good point about, you know, they're able to put a price on, you know, an acre of farm ground, but you would think they would also be looking at the value of what's flowing off the land in terms of the soil and the nutrients that they've put on the soil. That, I mean, it costs money to put those nutrients down, and then they sail away. It's a little. It
absolutely does, and you know, again, being able to work in this case with real farmers, you don't get any less professory than real farmers. I mean, these are like the world's most practical people. I mean, they're going to grow. They put out corn, they put out beans, they fertilize, because you know, everything they do there's a reason for doing it, and that reason is because they're going to make some money in order to keep living. You know, these are folks who are also maybe not like the as a community, I would say, like, they're not like early adopters of new approaches and whatnot. But then again, I've seen a whole heck of a lot of what I like to call folk engineering, right? Where, I mean, these are, again, some incredibly practical people who do things that are inspired by like what they see, and they take action to do stuff, and in some cases, it works. If the doing stuff means keeping your soil on your land, you know, there's some things that we can learn from that. And I was thinking back to, this was a UMRC probably maybe 5 years ago. It was at Stony Creek, and we had a session on sustainable farming. And there was a farmer from the central part of the state. I think it was the Farm Bureau that was hosting trips for other farmers to visit his farm to see how.
Illinois.
Yes, yeah, in Illinois, sorry. I think he's over by Peoria. That could be wrong. But this guy was a really tremendous speaker, and that was his whole pitch. He's like, you know, I do this to feed my family. This is a business. It was my dad's business. I want it to be my children's business. And there is a way forward for us to do things that make some sense from a business point of view, and that makes some sense from an environmental, ecological point of view. So we've got that integration, at least in some part, of the economics and the environment, which is not that common. Boy, I just wish I could remember his name. But again, you know, a person who's just someone who gave me some inspiration for looking at the stuff that we're doing now.
Okay, I've got one more comment here back from Leland Searles, who posed the first one. He says, for what it's worth, there are many crop fields that have minimal or no contour tillage in Marshall County, Iowa. That practice is at least 80 years old. Getting to extended waterways because of new erosion or prairie strips take that land out of production, or stream buggers is a hard sell, even with programs. There's pressure, but more pressure to produce ever more. If there's a question here, I guess it's about how to value soil quality and other environmental features over the value of maximized production. In one case, Balinese rice production, 1,000 years of stable production have existed at about 85% of maximum yields. Do we need to have conversations about maximum versus decent yields?
I'm going to use the same answer I gave to the gentleman's first question. Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sure. When you do things like put land that would otherwise be used for production, for crop production, into conservation agreements, when you use it to create riparian buffer zones and things like that, you're taking that land out of production, and that is a net decrease in the amount of land area that farmers have to produce. I mean, yes, again, at this point, I think we do such an uneven kind of job of approaching these problems that you want to make sure that you involve farmers, again, who are kind of like the folk engineers folks. You want to involve folks in the regulatory capacity, and you also want to involve folks on the science and engineering side to really start to brainstorm out some serious ideas about how to do this. Because of course, you're right. If it takes, if you'd be able to, grow crops right up to the edge of the water and still be able to manage the sediment and nutrient loading problem in the waterway, well, oh yeah, of course. That would be an ideal case. And this is just something that I've noticed. I'm not a farmer. I do not play a farmer on TV. So this is just my completely uninformed opinion. But when you drive from one upper Mississippi River Basin state to another, perhaps across a river between two states that begin with I, I'm shocked to see how things are done so differently in one of those states in sort of a progressive way, and how maybe not necessarily, I don't know, the progressive way. Now I just rammed it, I stuck my foot right in my mouth. I mean, there's stuff that people do. I'm looking at these fields in some parts of particularly Western Illinois. I'm like, guys, why don't you plant something on that in the winter? Or again, when you go to Iowa and you're like, oh, that makes sense. They've got some cover cropping going on there. I mean, maybe there's I don't think it's a difference in like state subsidy or a state supported conservation programs. I think there's that change in the prevailing orthodoxy. Now, how do you make that happen? Boy, I am just so glad I'm an engineer and not like a social scientist or anything like that. Because I've got the luxury of saying, hey guys, here's the problem, and we should do blah blah thus and such. But you'll remember back in, I think, one of the third to last slide, what about practicability? That's where the rubber meets the road, and that's where I hang up the science hat and put on the engineer hat, because again, engineers, we're responsible for solving practical problems in ways that in ways that particularly use technology and whatnot, but also in ways that are also affordable. I can get whatever you want out of the water. You might not want to pay me for what it's going to cost, right? But I can get it. Okay, so again, the fact that I can get it out of the water, that's great. Okay, I'm a genius, but not really, because nobody in their right mind would pay to have it done. Right. So how do we make it accessible? How do we make it practical? And how do we get more folks working together? But again, being 2 days after Election Day, folks working together is, that's another whole different story. But again, I think if you not monetize it, but you try to let folks know that, hey guys, over the next 30 years, when you hand thus and such over to your children or your siblings' children or whatever, to continue your legacy, right? That this is how much you could have saved. I think there's value in that. Literal and figurative value.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to. I mean, I have a rough idea of how to do it, but not specifics.
Yeah, therein lies one of the many challenges, right?
Oh, hang on. I don't think I answered all of the gentleman's question. The question about how do you value soil based on value in soil based on quality. Was that part of the question?
Let's see. Value soil quality and other environmental features over the value of maximized production.
Yeah. Okay. And the thing about valuing, whether it's like, if you said soil with this much organic content or total organic carbon, whatever is worth more than whatever, you would start to be like the puppy that finds its tail. And the puppy finds out, oh, look at that, and starts to chase it, and ultimately ends up exhausted and passed out in the corner. I think what you need to do is come up with a set of just a handful of a few criteria. Maybe organic carbon, could be nitrogen availability, things like that, as a first step towards scoping that out, because then you could get people who are like, oh, but what about the sulfur fraction and who's and what's this? Because because we can analyze it. Does that mean that because I can quantify it, does it mean it's significant? Oh, again, that's something that we could also argue about for a long time. So I think if you're going to do something like that, I'm one of those people who likes to start out the year with maybe 3-5 goals, something like that. And at the end of the year, when I do my annual report, like I'm sure everybody has to do an annual report, if I chose 5 things to do and I actually accomplished 3 of them, I personally and professionally find that fulfilling, as opposed to other people who come up with 15, maybe 18 goals. And at the end of the year, they find out that I've done smattering of this on this goal and blah, 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 but nobody, you don't close the loop. So maybe start out with something that's a little bit more practical. I mean, if you're defining what you consider to be value, right? You could say, we're going to go with organic carbon, we're going to go with nutrient availability and whatever else, right? Maybe total depth of organic, something of that nature. Go from there. But that would be just me if I was like in charge of the world and had an unlimited amount of time and money to hang out and to try to solve that problem. But I'm sure there are people who are much better informed also about those things than I am to provide a more meaningful answer. But it's a great question, and it gets back to the stuff stops. All the rules kind of end when you leave the lab or you leave the classroom and what have you. Which is one of the reasons I really love working, particularly where we live, because there's just a tremendous amount of really huge, significant stuff. Whether it's the Mississippi River and other large tributaries. We have American bald eagles. We have rainbow mussels. I've seen a rainbow mussel like in a museum and stuff like that, but I've actually found a rainbow mussel in the river. That's well, again, maybe I've just been locked down for a little too long, but to me, I was really charged up about that. When do you see that? Where do you see that? And how do we make sure that that my kids or my grandkids or what have you, your kids, grandkids, are going to have the same opportunity to go out and maybe decide to traipse around in the middle of the river looking for mussels and find something really significant in a good way, because we can find a whole heck of a lot of stuff that's significant in a not good way.
Right. Hopefully that's getting cleaned up slowly, but yeah.
I think so. And even just talking about stuff like this, I mean, the fact that we're even having the conversation is, I think, a pretty substantial step in the right direction. And let's not let it just die on the vine. Okay, keep this up, which is, going back to my earlier comment about how, even though we don't have an Upper Mississippi River Conference per se this year, that this is sort of keeping in that spirit and trying to keep keep some of that forward momentum going. So I do. I appreciate it.
Having the conversations and making people think. So I don't see anything else coming in. So last chance attendees. Otherwise, I will say thank you so much to Roger for putting this together and presenting us.
You bet. Appreciate it.
And Headwater streams. And just a plug for the next few sessions coming up. Next week we have 2 of them on November 10th, which I think is Tuesday. We've got the rediscovery and healing of an urban river, the Kinnick River in Milwaukee. And then on Thursday, 2 guys from the Nature Conservancy are going to talk about science and decision tools to guide floodplain protection and restoration. We have an actual tool that they've developed. Then the following week, there are the final 2 sessions, implementing Illinois nutrient loss reduction strategy and stair-step approach for engaging community members in volunteer water quality monitoring. And then the wrap-up will be the UMRBA, Upper Mississippi River Basin Association, and they joined up with the Corps of Engineers and talked to a lot of people along the Mississippi. I believe it was last year. You lose all sense of time in your quarantine bunker here. So they're going to talk about what they found out on flood and sediment and drought management planning. So there's still time to register. We'd love to have you come back for a few more, and let's all hope for a better fall next year, that we can all get together and talk more about all of these things. All right, well, I think that's it. So thank you, Roger, and thanks also, Roger. He's on our planning committee for the conference too, so he helps us in that way too, and we really appreciate it.
I'm glad to do it, and again, appreciate the opportunity to chat with folks today. If you do have questions that pop up and whatnot, my contact info is on the last slide, but it's also clickable, I think, in the notes from the on the PDF. So, you know, I'm just going to probably sit here in my COVID bunker and just wait for people to email me. So, you know, just feel free. Okay. Thank you again. I appreciate it, folks. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.